I began my doctoral work while I was still working full time here at Albertus, and actually was able to finish collecting all of my data before I was granted sabbatical. So my sabbatical time was really spent being able to write this up and really immerse myself with all of the material. So I want to invite you to minimize the presenter screen just because there'll be videos that are a part of this presentation, and you'll be able to see more of the video if you do that. So I'm going to present on my method, the one canvas method, which is art making that transforms on one surface over a sustained period of time. And many of you in the audience have experienced this method. Some of you have not, but may still. So I want to do a shout out, of course, to my dissertation committee. Dr. Sean McNiff was my chair. Dr. Denise Malice, my internal committee member, and my external committee member was Dr. Pat Allen. And there you have visuals, because I'm very visually oriented. So an abstract. I explored a specific artistic practice that I created over the years. I built on a pilot study that I had completed over the course of a year. The research was focused and driven by 3 research questions, and 3 modes of documentation were used. 5 adults were the participants, and they gathered in 4 meetings. This was an artistic inquiry, and it yielded patterns and characteristics as the outcomes. 4 specific outcomes emerged. So just to introduce you, what is the one canvas method? Specifically, I had been really fascinated by change processes and transformations, especially in artwork and imagery, and that's also a very core part of being an art therapist is change. I wanted to look at what emerged from these changes, and this has really been a driving force through much of my life. In fact, my undergraduate art studio art show, which was my thesis, the title was Transformations, and that was back in 1979. So it's been a theme in my life for a long time. At the same time that I was developing this method, I was also really more deeply embracing my own identity as an artist art therapist. And so this method has become very important for me as a teacher, a supervisor, an art therapist, and also for personal growth. And I believe that it has relevance for the field. So what does this method look like? What does using assemblage and painting materials in an ongoing process sustained on one canvas over time look like? I want to show you a video clip of one of my participants. This is Mike's work, and you'll see a transformation over the course of 3 sessions, actually. Just be aware of what you feel rather than trying to understand it. So in this process that's ongoing, the continual images are as important as the final product. So we have a combination and a blend of process and product, and often in art therapy, they're bifurcated. I began by really doing extensive literature review that was focused on the 4 main components of this method, and I'll go through those with you. Those 4 components are sustained art making on one canvas, an artistic exploration of transforming imagery, the interim periods, and visual documentation. So perhaps as you watched that short clip, you felt some of the complexity of the process and how might research be done on this process. So I looked to the literature. Sustained art making that transforms on one surface was really also explored by Jo Rice in 1987. She examined one theme over the course of a year and continued to transform her artwork as you see here. Pat Allen had also done extensive work in one of her seminal art pieces called The Sabbath Bride. And there has been many publications on one canvas art-based utilized in supervision. A number of those have been by myself and a co-researcher. The materials that are used in this sustained art making were also examined in the literature review: acrylic paints, canvas, and collage assemblage materials. And additionally, I looked at reworking techniques and how that might contribute to understanding what might be happening during this process. The second component is an artistic exploration of transforming imagery. This is really the conceptual foundation, that the intention of this kind of work is to be welcoming and open to any and all images, to listen to the creative process and impulse as it's occurring, and to learn and pay attention to how the experience is shared and conveyed. There's a non-judgmental stance and attitude of the art therapist or anybody using this method, and we're always paying attention to multiple domains of awareness. So the personal, the universal, the archetypal, and the intra and interpersonal. So these conceptual foundations really looked at the attention to image and art making and artwork that had been laid forward by archetypal art therapists, transformational art therapists, those who are orienting to somewhat of an expansive component to what's happening in the art making. Depth work was explored in terms of understanding the use of mystery and symbolism in archetypal art therapy, interacting with construction and deconstruction components. And looking at therapeutic qualities that might come from this kind of exploration, there wasn't as much literature in this area, but the role of the art therapist was examined, as well as concepts of continual change, what happens when we reflect on artwork, and looking at the idea of completion, because when you're doing ongoing, sustained art making, the question continued to emerge: when do we know that it's done? So anybody just mute your microphones, thank you. A third essential component of this method is the use of what I call interim periods, and that's the time between art making sessions. So that was actually the focus of my pilot study, was looking at the pause during the one canvas method. So I explored the pauses in therapy, as well as what emerged from the pilot study, which was that tension was an integral part of this and necessary. Leaving the canvas at the end of session often was accompanied by a sense of tension, and that there were 4 principles of the interim period that emerged from this research. One was that there was a sense of continuity and companioning by working on the one canvas method, and also because of the pause period, there was an integral connection. There was a contemplation of impermanence that emerged during the pause period. The pause itself, the time between, acted as a marker or a touchstone. As well, the time between allowed for gestation and incubation. These are core components of creativity research as well. And the fourth component of the one canvas method is the inclusion of continual visual documentation. In the past, that has been explored through audio and visual exploration, and my own prior use by taking digital photographs, and Rice used photographs as well. What's been found in the literature is that audio and visual documentation can stimulate memory and support multiple perspectives of awareness. There was also a lot of examination of the use of digital recording and inclusion within art therapy. Additionally, I looked at the component of editing, because editing video footage was a huge part of doing this art-based research, where really the core component of material were the video recordings. So by reviewing all of the literature I was able to compose and direct 3 research questions, which then drove the method design. And really recognized that there was more to discover about this aspect of ongoing and transforming art making, especially in the field of art therapy. So the methods were designed to reflect artistic complexity, and they were guided by 3 research questions. 1, are there art therapy qualities that are unique to the one canvas assemblage painting process? 2, what are the therapeutic qualities of the interim periods during one canvas work I wanted to build on my pilot study? And 3, can the digital media that is used to document one canvas processes further appreciation and understanding of therapeutic arts modalities? And I had a real adverse reaction to video use in my pilot study. I still didn't love it during my dissertation work, but I really have come to appreciate many of its qualities. At the time of starting the research, I really was still on the fence and so wanted to examine this. I used an art-based research design. This is somewhat new to many of you, and I'm going to, as succinctly as possible, convey the components of it. I'm not going to go into a comparison, but you'll kind of hear and see how it is different than quantitative research, and it often is seen as an offshoot of qualitative research. However, it has its own silo. In art-based research, the art making, the works and the art making are the primary evidence. There are interconnected systems between the art making and the art product, and the art itself and the evidence of the art making are used as primary evidence for distillation and discovery. That means you're continually reviewing, looking at the artistic process and product. Central also then to your presentation of your research is an artistic element in how you present it. Art-based research also incorporates the use of the researcher's aesthetics, that being the embodied experience of participants and the researcher are seen as valid. And this has been documented by numerous researchers. This method aligns well with the worldview of many art therapists because it's more similar to what we actually are doing in practice. One thing to also note about art-based research is that there's really an embracing of an aesthetic bias and recognizing that there is not an effort to be completely objective in this kind of research. So my participants in this research were 4 adults and myself. They all gave permission to use their names, except one person asked for a pseudonym. The criteria for participating in this research was somebody who had never used this method before, except for myself, and the ability to tolerate the tension of leaving 1 week at a time and not having a kind of sustained understanding, but being able to maintain a semblance of being okay, basically. So I pre-screened participants, and then 4 out of 6 people who had volunteered were chosen and agreed to come to 4 sessions. I also created for each participant an individual summary statement and video, created slideshow links that are in the appendices of my document, and really recognized that for each person I looked at their individual process and experience in the art making of one canvas work, as well as the overarching themes and patterns and principles that emerged for everybody. I also approached this research seeing my participants as companions. This was put forward by Lett and Lewin and Reason as a valid research methodology. So Britt, Kath, myself, Mike, and Dana were the participants. Here's a sample of the design. The materials utilized were each participant met one-on-one with a 24 by 36 inch canvas, primarily using acrylic and gouache paints. variety of brushes, palette knives, variety of assemblage materials. I recorded every session with each participant wore a GoPro Hero camera on their head strap. And I also had a standing tripod digital camera set up to record every session. And individual digital photographs were taken throughout the art making. So here's a typical design. Each person signed up one at a time to come for 4 meetings. They met with me one-on-one about a week apart. So I would see one person for about a month, and then the next participant would come. The participants never met each other. Did an orientation screening, had consent forms, and then at the first meeting, we engaged in one canvas art making. And during that time, there was a brief reflection and audio recordings happened. The 4th meeting was for review and reflection, where we watched the videos, composite videos that I had created for each person, both an ongoing video and a slideshow. So what I showed you at the beginning of this presentation was Mike's slideshow. I'll also be showing you a clip from his video. In that 4th meeting, there was no art making. And so there were 2 interim periods, and each participant was given a journal. So a sample of what one of the meetings looked like. The participant would do a brief check-in, and I would reflect back and audio record. They would then continuously make art for about an hour to an hour and a half. I would support that process by witnessing, offering prompts when asked that might be particular to materials use, reworking the imagery, perhaps turning the canvas. Participants would lead when they wanted to have a brief pause for reflection. Perhaps something came up in the artwork that they were reminded of something and they wanted to talk about it or reflect on it before continuing to make art. We really stressed that this was a time to pay attention to multiple meanings, to not lock down into a premature conceptualization, and that was often a time when a photograph would be taken. Really emphasizing that meaning was ongoing and changing. The participant would lead the decision to stop, and then we would sit together looking at the painting where it was and reflect on what had happened. And this was for about 5 to 15 minutes and was recorded and witnessed. What led this conversation at this point was what happened. This was audio recorded. So here's a sample of art making writ to give you a sense. Really notice her treatment of the expanding collage image that comes in on the upper right, and I'll tell you when that emerges, but see the different techniques she's using. There's the collage image that comes in. So this was done for every participant. Every participant was video recorded. So I ended up having about 50 hours of video documentation. I had really a great amount of audio documentation. All of the audio recordings were also transcribed. And I had digital photographs. And so part of my work, a great deal of my work as in terms of the research then was to do a rigorous review and editing process. And during that, I carried 2 assumptions. The ways in which art making communicates is different from the logical comprehension and logical comprehension of language. And an artistic focus generates a unique way of understanding and creating knowledge. So this is really the heart of art therapy as well. And carrying the assumption into the research allows it to be more applicable for practice. I responded to observing, witnessing as an artist, and there were multiple phases throughout this rigorous review and editing process. So I'd like to try and give you a brief visit into that. The review process occurred through multiple phases. Right after each session, I would take notes. I would review every video and take notes on reviewing the video. Between sessions, I would review the video and edit and create a summary video that was about 6 to 8 minutes gleaned down from about 5 hours of video. And I would create a 1-minute slideshow that was gleaned down from about 70 images to about 35 for each person. After the first participant had completed, I also reviewed everything with my dissertation advisor to really perfect the methods and look at how we might do it even better, how I might do it even better. So, looking at the artifacts, the empirical evidence, the artifacts of the work, it was a cyclic and simultaneous reflection and review. I really utilized my artistic ways of knowing to help lead to the outcome. So the artifacts for review, looking simply, like looking at these dots, there were 345 still photos and they were distilled into 5 composite slideshows. There were journal and field notes that were shared as well. The field notes are my own, the journal notes are from the participant. There were 367 minutes of audio recordings and 22 transcripts that were reviewed, 5 one-canvas paintings that were reviewed, and 30 hours of GoPro and digital video camera footage that was then gleaned into 5 individual summary videos. So if you look at those simple dots on the top, those are the artifacts. To do an empirical, cyclic, and simultaneous reflection and review, I would examine for what was felt evocative. What were the characteristics that were emerging? What were some of the patterns? What felt poignant in the moment and in reflection? Were there repetitive motions, repetitive images? Where was movement? And what meanings were emerging? And so you see how that initial simple dot then begins to expand in what it's offering and giving me in terms of information. And then another cyclic review creates another pattern, another rich amount of knowledge that begins to come forward. And through that process of looking, reviewing, reflecting, looking, reviewing, reflecting, for participants in this study, results emerged. A core paradoxical quality came through, that the images were ongoing and transient. They continually changed, but the painting itself was always there. That was steady and ongoing. There were also a number of opposite qualities that emerged. So things like constructing and deconstructing, revealing and concealing, paints and assemblage were used. And these multiple realities were coexisting throughout the process of art making. So what happened? 4 outcomes emerged. And when I share these outcomes, I'd like to also share some quotes from my participants as well as some more video clips. So the first 2 outcomes respond to guiding question 1. Are there art therapy qualities that are unique to the one canvas painting assemblage process? I found that what was unique is that this method provides opportunities for the experience of a continual process of change and transformation. As Kath said, I think if it had been a come in once and do it, it would have been flat. This feels visceral and 3-dimensional and lifelike, like the way we reveal ourselves to ourselves. This is Dana. So it's clear that there's an ongoing change process that continued to happen. And this occurred for every participant. The second outcome was that there was an enhanced sense of the integral dynamic between new creations and the loss of previous ones. So this process involved the ongoing covering of many existing expressions, some that even seemed complete, and it led to many emergent images. This seemed particularly compelling, and it was also new for everybody. So perhaps you've already noticed some of your reactions when you've seen images come and go. Every participant had reactions to that. And this is a 30-second clip of my work of covering and new images emerging, which also reflects what Britt said. Oh God, it's all gone. It's not all gone, but it is. I miss what's underneath. It's there. I know it's there. It's still kind of like a sad goodbye in a sense. So outcome 3 responded to guiding question number 2. What are the therapeutic qualities of the interim periods during one Canvas work? The time between sessions was found to be significant by all participants, and this really affirmed the outcomes from my pilot study. Additionally, 2 therapeutic qualities really seemed to emerge, that the creative process really did continue even when active art making wasn't happening. What was comforting and therapeutic to all participants was knowing that changes could be made and that they were able to resource ideas and materials during the interim period. So participants were invited to bring in any found materials or collage images, such as the image that we saw Britt apply in the upper right during that interim period. There were 3 characteristics of therapeutic value. There was continuity. Mike calls the painting "Hello, Old Friend" when he came in. The interim period also acted as a marker or a touchstone. Dana said the process itself served as a jumping off point for a family session. So the image you see on the right was her painting at the pause between the second and third painting session, and she used that. She brought that into her family session, her family therapy session. Additionally, that pause time, that time in between, was an incubation and gestation experience that led to different kinds of manifestations. So Britt said the time and the space in between, even though nothing changes, something did change. Finally, the 4th outcome responded to guiding question 3. Can digital media that is used to document one Canvas processes further appreciation and understanding of the therapeutic arts modalities? I found that the digital media made notable contributions. It enhanced remembering. And Mike said, wow, I forgot that it had so much to it. To see where it started, every step of the way contributed to the end result. New perceptions emerged. So what ended up happening is when, during the 4th review meeting, which you see a picture of at the right, the canvas was there, and then we showed a review to each participant, the videos. And while they were actually watching the videos, new awareness and new perceptions came up from their interaction with visually seeing what they had done, remembering some things that they had forgotten. So Britt said, up close and personal, it does look so different than when you see it with your own eyes. And Kath said the still photos made me see things in a different way. Editing and repeated viewing and sharing the video summaries furthered the identification of the research outcomes. This was very, very clear. Here's a clip from the interaction, the 4th review with Kath. And what I want you to notice is that watching the hand transform. What was really amazing with Kath's interaction with her video watching was that when she saw that hand emerge in the review process, she relayed to me that initially when she made the hand, she thought that she wanted to reach to somebody else or to have them reach down to her. When she saw it on the video, she actually recognized that it was her own hand that she wanted to reach outwards. So rather than having somebody come towards her, she was recognizing it really meant that she needed to reach outward. So just to review the 4 outcomes, this process provided an opportunity for the ongoing experience of the continuous process of change and transformation through art making. It enhanced the sense of an integral dynamic between new creations and the loss of previous ones. The time between sessions was significant, and digital media made notable contributions. So I want to emphasize that these outcomes were for participants in this study only. We can't generalize this kinds of research. However, they do mirror and reflect what I have experienced as a therapist and as somebody who uses the process as well as uses it with clients and supervisees over the past 12 years. So part of the discussion became a final assemblage video, which was a 6-minute aggregate video that demonstrated the outcomes. It highlighted outcomes 1 and 2, and it really is an example of outcome number 4. And it was integral in distilling, refining, and synthesizing all of the material. So I'd like to move into some discussion, and then we'll have time for questions. The discussion oriented to 3 qualities of what seemed to emerge from this process. It was depth work, it seemed to generate an integrative dynamic, and transformation occurred in every instance. The ongoing change processes over time were unlike single-session traditional art therapy models. The depth was really paramount from the first session of painting because of this ongoing method. Meaning making was ongoing and changing. The unique challenges that were presented seemed to foster artistic ways to respond. In other words, this idea of, I can do anything to this painting, I can change it in any way, I can rework it, I can explore multiple meanings with multiple levels of awareness, generated an artistic way to respond to struggles and challenges. There was also clearly an integrative experience where the art making and the artworks blended. In fact, in conversation, in the interviews, this continued to come up time and time again. Their self-reflections went deep, literally. A great deal was unearthed unintentionally. Multiple levels of awareness came through, both through the art making on levels of psychological awareness and also the numinous. Quite many reflections touched into spiritual components. Another level of depth that came through that was unanticipated, but I do think it relates to outcome 2, was that every participant relayed spontaneously some experience of loss, both in their personal life, and it was mirrored and reflected in the art making process. And then they used the art making process to move through different layers of emotions and responses to the loss. The experience was integrative. Multiple truths shared time and space, and there were many both and qualities that we looked at. So we looked at what was it like to use paints and assemblage materials? What was it like to both have images revealed and concealed? To both paint and also then have time away from the painting, but have that still be a continual process of the art making experience. What was also integrative was the experience that participants talked about the painting being a partner to them in this exploration. They integrated a different quality of identity of relationship to the painting itself. Every participant spoke about transformation and that the process was transformative. Participants seemed to engage and learn a new rhythm of art making that really incorporated different perceptions and thoughts as well. One of the most profound awareness that came through was that as life transforms, they saw that reflected as their art making transformed. So as they were able to transform images, they saw how that reflected how life changes. New perceptions also emerged for every participant as an artist. This was also unexpected in that the authentic expression that seemed to emerge really seemed to be exciting for people. Basically saying, oh, wow, I made this. This came out of me. And embracing this idea of being an artist without needing to start out with an intention to create something. What else, the other aspect that was very transformative was the video review process. And I think that this shows great potential, although it's quite cumbersome. So I don't know how realistic it is to think about integrating video documentation when you're working with clients. However, it was such a rich experience to sit with participants and review the ongoing transformation of their one canvas work and have them reflect on how they then learned that change continues. This was really a profound experience for everybody. Of course, with any research, we always look at limitations. Clearly, the numbers of participants and the demographics were a limitation, and this was also a non-clinical population. I also did not create my typical response art, which would have gleaned more information, I think, for me. But because I had my art making and also was using the editing process as an art making experience, I felt that that was response art in a way. For future research, I'd love to see more attention to how this process and this method really encourages an artistic identity, how it's used in as a clinical model, both using the photo tracking and video review. And also the idea that we used multiple materials and incorporating other materials, perhaps chalk pastels, among others. I'd like future research to really look at the integration of assemblage materials and the breaks in attunement that seem to be reflected when assemblage materials came in. So an example of that is, if you see at the second image there, there's a hole cut in the canvas. When Kath cut that hole, and then I reviewed it, I was startled. There's something that happens when the canvas is transformed that way. And that's startling as a therapist could mean a break in attunement. And so what I noticed continually was that when three-dimensional materials were brought into the work, there was a shift in the energy, there was a shift in the rhythm, and that the work then was also about reattuning, coming back into a rhythm that was different than a painting rhythm. Future research, I think, on loss and the experience of flow, which was also something that all participants identified, that they would move in and out of a flow experience. So in summary, the continual changes were challenging initially, and then they became intrinsically satisfying, fulfilling, and transformational. Every participant stated these same essences, and it was observed in their ways of engaging with the process. I began with Mike's 30-second slideshow. I want to end with Mike's a short clip to really emphasize the aliveness in this process. And I feel like that's one of the major contributions to the field. So at the end of the work, Mike said, picking up my painting upon completion was an interaction all to itself. It was much more dense than what I would have imagined. It felt very much alive and gave off an energy that was both new and yet very familiar. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions. I'm going to stop the screen share and faces. Hopefully that'll work. Oop, I'm frozen now.
Were you able to?
I'm frozen. I don't know if you can hear me.
We could hear you, and
Yeah.
we could see you. I mean, at least I could. I don't know if.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
you're quite audible and visible.
okay, well
Yeah,
that
I can see
all right,
yours.
well then I'll just take I'll take questions and perhaps this will unfreeze, but I'm happy to take any questions. I just can't see who's asking them. So maybe
Um,
just could see whose hands are up.
yeah. So, Becca, you have a question?
Yes. So, I understand that you met with each participant, you said, on their own for a month and then another month and another month, but did you continue to work on the same canvas during that time, or did you work on separate canvases?
Each participant had their own canvas that they worked on. And my participation was exactly the same. I also spent a month just meeting with myself once a week on one canvas. So at the end of the research, there were 5 separate canvases to review.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm.
Okay, my turn.
Uh, um, Sarah and then Courtney.
Um, Hi, Abby. What was your approach with the reattunement process when with that participant who cut the hole in the canvas?
Well, during the research, I was just holding space and witnessing as a researcher. So I wasn't intervening, it wasn't therapy. Um, Mainly what I was noticing in that experience of attunement, reattunement later on was how participants themselves reattuned to their own process. And then also how, when I was reviewing video, what that felt like to me, and really noticing that kind of jarring experience when there was this kind of shift out of rhythm, and then how I could settle into being aware of what was happening. Does
Okay.
that answer your question?
Yes, thank
Great.
you.
Hmm.
Courtney and then Eric.
Hi, Abby. Thank you so much for presenting this. It was beautiful. Really nice presentation. I was curious about you were describing how this process kind of helps like delineate ways of understanding and creating knowledge.
Hmm.
And I was wondering what kind of specifically what do you mean by that in regards to creating knowledge?
Well, all research is intended to create new knowledge. That's the definition of why we do research. So creating new knowledge is about putting together conclusions that come from the evidence, that come from the empirical evidence. And so it's really based on, an art-based research is based on what knowledge emerges from the observation, from the sensing, the perception, and the experience of what happened. So it's a different way of understanding that there is evidence, empirical evidence. However, it is really, really aligned with what we do as art therapists.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Eric.
Hi, Abby. That was really
Yeah,
fascinating, interesting stuff.
great.
It was. I was just curious. I had a couple questions. One, I was wondering if they were allowed to rotate the canvas, which I saw some people do in that last video. So that answered that. But I was curious in the process, was there any like desire or longing to kind of scrape back down through the previous layers and I know you could do it digitally by videotaping it. or was it just kind of a building up process, or was there any kind of desire on the participants to scrape through the layers and kind of get back to the original or parts of the original? I think there was one that
Yeah,
had.
yeah. Everybody actually scraped. So everybody engaged in a process where they both removed and adhered or layered. So it was a both
Okay.
and everybody experienced and went into spontaneously using palette knives and scraping.
Was there like an emotional attachment that they expressed from that, or like, kind of like digging in?
Um, everybody had emotional responses at different times. It was very idiosyncratic. It wasn't specifically just towards the scraping.
Yeah,
There were different moments that emotion emerged, and those were much more particular to that person's referencing of their experience and what was
very
coming.
individual experience.
In terms of when the emotions emerged, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
But emotionality, and emotional connection emerged in every single experience, yeah. And
that's
surprisingly, people
fantastic.
were surprised. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing this with us today,
You're welcome.
Doctor.
Uh-huh.
Just a quick note. I can't. There's 17 participants, and I can't see everybody on my gallery screen. So
Okay, Hilda here. Can
Hi,
I ask a question?
yeah,
yes.
Hilda, and then Sami after. I'm sorry if I
Hi.
mispronounced your name.
Hi, Hilda.
Hi, Abby. Sorry I'm late. As you know, I had the faculty council meeting.
I
So,
see.
my question you may have already addressed in the earlier part of the presentation.
Mhm.
I assume these were all done individually, not as a group. Is
Yes,
that correct?
one to one. Hmm.
So I'm wondering, could you reflect on how it might have differed if it was a group setting in which people are going through these processes?
So I do this process with my group in supervision, and I've led numerous workshops that are in groups. So the process itself is still an experience that incorporates, I would say, all of the findings from this research. However, there's also a shared experience. There's often in group work with this method, shared symbols emerge spontaneously. Um, there's, I'd say, more of the kind of collective unconscious dynamic that emerges, and so you get more of a group art therapy process, even though it's a very individual art making experience.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
It is
Anything?
my turn.
Uh,
Hi,
yeah.
Abby.
Hi, Asami.
It's nice to see you and all my familiar faces. At one point you mentioned life transformation and art transformation
Hmm.
as things were like sort of like parallel to each other. As you and your participants were going through each stages, um, did anybody like actually notice the transformation as it was happening, or was it more like towards the end, like seeing the result and like experiencing each stages as they go through their emotions and thoughts and things?
So there was awareness of transformation, certainly of images as they were happening. So kind of right off the bat. I think it was the layering of the transformational process and the depth of what um, each person associated with how that reflected their own life transformations that generated greater meaning and greater awareness, and that seemed to build. So that seemed to come forward more over time. And then really when we were doing reflecting in the fourth meeting, which was a reflection and review meeting, which lasted about an hour and a half, there was a great deal of conversation about looking back and reflecting on all the transformations, all the changes that had happened, um, and how that mirrored their own life processes, sometimes very specific aspects of their lives. As I said, everybody mentioned loss and how they moved through that.
Thank you.
Mhm. Apologize that my computer is all frozen and I'm not moving my lips as I'm talking, but any other
Doc,
questions?
Dr. Miller, I have a question. How did the how did the participant engage with their skill level, like their painting skill? Like,
Yeah.
as it progressed, how was the relationship between their skill level and how they felt about what was going on, and maybe the therapeutic benefits of it?
Yeah. So initially, two of the participants called themselves artists, and two of the participants had not made any art as adults. And as you might imagine, the two who had not made any art as adults had a lot more trepidation, but very quickly engaged with the playful aspect of this art making. They very quickly embraced the idea that this was all about just the process of art making rather than trying to create something specific. And then over time, as I said, this seemed to generate for them more of an artist's identity because they actually then saw, I wouldn't call it skill as much as honest expression that felt very truthful and very expressive. And that this was very validating, very affirming, and also very exciting for participants. Additionally, the two participants who were already artists and myself, all of us also discovered some new qualities to our artistic expression. Neither of them had made art this way before, and all seemed to take some of these skills in terms of the skill of doing process painting, the skill of turning the canvas, the skill of using multiple materials. And see what that offered in terms of a whole nother level of artistic expression. I hope that answered your question.
Abby, it's Hilda again. Just so you know, we can see you, by the way, and you're
You
moving
can?
and you're quite normal. You are not frozen to us.
Oh, thank you for telling me. I'm glad I wasn't doing anything really weird.
Exactly. I needed to make sure you didn't.
That's good. Thank you.
We we have an time for one more question. And if I can only see 9 people at a time, so if you have a question, feel free to just chime in.
You can ask a second question if you want, even if you already asked one.
I guess I have a question. You mentioned, this is Marissa, by the way. You mentioned that during the interim periods, they had journals.
Hmm.
I was just wondering how, I guess, how that could have came into play with their process.
Hmm.
I understand like the creativity never stopped. So I was wondering if that kind of helped um
Yeah, it
in
was.
their art process.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the journals were used differently. Some people wrote in them, other people did little drawings and sketches in them over the course of time. And we brought the journals into that fourth review meeting, and then that's when people talked about how they were using them and how they reflected on them. Um, and some of the people, their journals actually were very prescient, so they made little sketches, and later those images that they sketched actually appeared in their canvas, but they weren't cognizant of it. And I pointed that out during our review session. So the journaling is a tracking um, tool that people were given the option to use or not. I mean, I gave everybody one, but they weren't required to use it. Everybody did use it, and to different degrees. So how I think that contributed was sort of like a transitional object of something that's there over time and space, reminding you of the painting. They didn't take the paintings home. The paintings stayed with me until after the fourth session, and then they took them home. So I had the paintings, but they had a journal. And so I think that was part of a kind of continuity thread for each of them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, I think we're at time. Is that right, Jason?
Joshua, but
Oh.
I'm new. I get it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's our time. Again, thank you, Dr. Abby Miller, for presenting on your one canvas art making. And thank you for everybody that showed up, asking great questions. It looks
Yeah.
like some of these are your students, so
Yes, a lot. And
yeah.
a lot of alumni too, which is great to see.
Yeah. I mean, I think we had max almost 20 participants join us, so I mean that's a good turnout. So thanks
Great.
again, and just be on the lookout for any more events. And there'll be a similar setup for the time being, given Corona season. Hopefully, we'll move into more in person as the year progresses. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Abby.
Bye,
Thank you.
Abby.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Joshua and Abby.
Thank you.